Hi everyone, it's me, Krylios, Team Racing Productions MC and producer. And joining me today is Will Schick. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here, Will. It's great to have you here, and I want to just start this all off with having you introduce yourself and give a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I am editor-in-chief of Street Sense Media. I just took over the role at the end of December this past year. We are a weekly newspaper that's focused on issues related to homelessness and poverty in general. We work with a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness, and you can see our vendors like throughout the city. I before that I was just the first full-time staff reporter for Street Sense, and I had been working there since June of last year.
Okay, great, great. And you've talked a little bit about street sense, but I want you to go into it a little bit more, give us a little bit of history about street sense, the idea to come up with it, and the voice it represents in the media landscape, and what's that been like for you, especially now, being the editor-in-chief.
Yeah, so I first started actually at Street Sense as an intern
Hmm.
a few years back. And that was my first sort of introduction to what's known as a street paper. So Street
Hmm.
Sense is part of a international network of street papers where we work off of like a certain kind of business model where people buy our papers from us wholesale for 50 cents a piece, and they sell
Hmm.
it for $2 and they keep the $1.50 as their own income. And so the paper does kind of two things. One, it gives people like a low barrier entry to employment, like a job that you can just walk in the door, get training, and then go out and sell the paper. But then it also gives you a platform for sort of talking about issues that are important to you. And
Yeah.
so we're actually one of only five of street papers around the world that produces original content weekly, that actually
Mhm.
has a weekly paper. And the concept for this in DC actually started in around 2003, where a few folks had decided to model this off of, how other cities were sort of doing this. And we've been pretty successful. And, even with a very small staff, we've published a lot of stories that have, gotten a lot of recognition from the local Society of Professional Journalists,
Yeah.
but also just giving people a platform to have their voices heard. And I think, we have a lot of different newspapers and different outlets in DC,
Hmm.
but we're the one that's really exclusively dedicated to um, people who are living in extreme poverty, going through really difficult periods of time in their life. And so we think about that a lot when we approach the stories that we write.
Yeah, certainly. And what has the pandemic been like how has it impacted what Street Sense Media does, and how has it impacted the coverage of the stories that are published in Street Sense?
That's a really good question because I feel like it's really easy for people to perhaps overlook the impact that the pandemic has had on people who don't have access to technology. And so a
Hmm.
lot of the communities that we work with don't necessarily have stable internet access, don't have access to smartphones,
Hmm.
and are not necessarily like, they can't just move their life onto Zoom. And so in March of 2020, as the pandemic began, Street Sense actually went virtual and started doing paper production online.
Hmm.
And then after that, this past year, and as you can imagine, that impacted the ability of vendors to make a profit, right? And so we
Yes,
were asking
certainly.
people to donate to vendors,
Hmm.
um, via we have a smart like an app that you can use on your phone to buy. So we were asking people to donate to vendors. Within this past year, we decided to go weekly. And so
Ah.
previously, we were publishing twice a month. And then when we made the transition back to in-person work, we decided to go weekly, which then kind of increased the ability for vendors to make sales, possibly doubling them, right? If you have double the amount of material to sell out. And so I think we've bounced back, but it's still been hard. There aren't as many people out commuting or visiting the same, metro stations.
Yes.
Um, And so, yeah, that's what I hear from vendors. But going weekly though has helped quite a bit.
Certainly, certainly. And I know that you guys also have the Look at This, a Street Sense Media podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit, the podcast and the idea about it, being a part of Street Sense Media.
Yeah. So a lot of people, when they think about Street Sense Media, they think of our newspaper.
Mm-hmm.
But what we also try to do is create a lot of other content because not everybody is a writer, and
Mm-hmm.
not everybody enjoys writing their stories. And so the Look at This podcast was like a short series that we did where we had somebody come in, do a little bit of training with our vendors, and then create a podcast centering on the voices of those people who sell our paper. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you, like working, we work out of the Church of the Epiphany. We
Mm-hmm.
rent some spaces there, and there's a very small office. But every day, I'm running into people that are coming in and telling these just incredible stories about their lives, about their experiences, and it's one thing when you get to write it on paper, but it's another thing to hear it directly. And I think
Yeah.
that podcast does a really good job of that.
Tell me about maybe a story or an experience from one of the vendors, that really has stood out to you or that's made an impact on you, that was in the newspaper, just a story from one of them or from the podcast. Talk to me about one of those.
Yeah. So, recently we've had just actually this past month, we've had about five of our vendors pass away. And I'm actually, yeah, it's really sad. And
Mhm.
the issue, so next week we'll be having an issue that's going to be a memorial issue in honor of
Mhm.
those vendors who passed away. But when you asked me that, I just immediately thought of a vendor named Ayub Abdul, and
Mhm.
he's one of those who passed away. And I'm working on his obituary, but I remember the first time I ever met him. He came up to me and he started speaking Chinese, knowing nothing about me. Started speaking Chinese to me, and he's an elderly, older man, um, different generation, and being Asian American, sometimes I run across somebody doing this. I happen to speak Chinese, and
Mhm.
so I started talking back with him, and then come to find out he speaks pretty good Chinese, and then and he was really well connected to the Chinatown community in DC, and
Mhm.
he was really into Tai Chi and Kung Fu, and had been doing all that stuff since like the 70s. Uh,
Wow.
and then he shared with me this story about how years ago he was working at Macy's as a shoe salesman.
Mhm.
And one day he ran across this, Asian woman, and
Mhm.
he just said something in Chinese to her, like the same way he said something in Chinese to me. And the woman looked at him and said, "Are you trying to learn? Are you trying to learn this language? Are you trying to learn Chinese?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, my father is trying to learn English, and he's
Ah.
Chinese. Would you like to meet him?" And then, so through that, he connected with this other elderly Chinese man, or this other Chinese man, and they developed a relationship and had lunch like every week for years. And then eventually, um, the Chinese man ended up going back to China and invited Ayub to go visit. So he ended up going to
Mhm.
visit China. But over the years, he's developed a lot of relationships this way, just going out and saying hello to people. And it's like unfolded into all these sort of crazy, really just interesting stories. And so,
Yes.
yeah, he's somebody I think about a lot. And
Certainly.
yeah.
Wow, wow. Talk to me a little bit about the importance of being able to have these stories, to put these stories out into the world, and to really be in a different niche, than other media, and just the importance of every individual story and how that affects them. And now that you're the editor in chief, I'm sure that is something that's really near and dear to your heart.
Yeah, it really is. And I think for me, one of the most important things about our work is to ensure that we're always keeping our audience in mind. You mentioned we have a niche. And so certainly our niche is really poverty issues. And so for us, it's not necessarily wanting to write about poverty issues, but writing for writing for communities that care about those issues, right? And so I think what you see generally sometimes in news coverage is for like a general audience, and for us, we're looking to give people the information that they need that they don't know about. I wrote a story last year about what do you do if you're single and homeless in DC? Like, how do you get a housing voucher? Who do you go to ask for help? And so I modeled that story off of the experiences of one of our vendors who shared with me the frustration that he was having trying to navigate the voucher process. And so we teamed up together, and I said, well, what did you find out? Okay, well, let me go call and see what I can find out, as a journalist. And we put together a story like that. And then, we also like our stories to reach people who might be interested in helping people who are experiencing homelessness, or might be interested in learning a little bit more about, how housing policy works in DC. And so, and I think that's like kind of the importance of it. It's really, for us, is really mission oriented in that sense. And with our stories, is particularly our journalism, we're not really looking to entertain, right? We're looking to inform.
Yes. And do you have a connection with the other street newspapers and everything internationally around the world?
We do. And actually, just the other day, I got off of a call with one of our street paper affiliates in Glasgow, Scotland, at the headquarters, International Network of Street Papers there, as well as with one of the editors over at Street Roots, which is another paper out of Portland, Oregon.
I see.
Yeah, and it was just really neat to see, how we approached some of the same. We have the same kind of mission, even though we're in different environments. It's very similar things that we're going through.
That is great. Well, if people wanted to, support, donate, learn more about, how are they able to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, so I always tell people to seek out a vendor and buy paper. Usually you can find vendors at most of all the metro stations around DC, also at farmers markets and things like that. You could also visit us at streetsensemedia.org. And then you can also come visit our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram sites and to learn more about what we do and our stories and how to get involved.
Awesome. Well, to our viewers, those links will be in the description below, so you can go ahead and check that out and get some real stories, support if you want to, and really learn more about streetsensemedia.org. Well, thank you so much, Will, for joining me today. It has been such a pleasure speaking with you and learning more about Street Sense Media.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. And to our viewers, please follow Team Racine Productions on all forms of social media and like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. But most of all, thank you for watching. Bye, everyone.